So welcome, my name's Natalie Ray. I'm from Ocean Unite, as an NGO that works to supercharge ocean protection. Firstly, I'm going to start with the housekeeping rules. So obviously we're on Zoom. We suggest people press the gallery view so you can see all the speakers. This session is being recorded. And at the moment you just see our panelists with their videos. The rest of you will be muted with your sound off, but you will have the opportunity to ask questions either through the chat, so please feel free to do that, or otherwise you can raise your hand and we can promote you to take the floor and ask a question. If you want to, you can keep your video on or off, that's up to you. How we're going to run the session is that we'll be talking to each of the different panelists, and in between you'll be able to ask questions. So as they're talking and you think of a question you want to ask them, please just put that in the chat or raise your hand. So I think those are the housekeeping rules, so we can get started. So 2020, that was supposed to be a super year for the ocean. As we all know, because we're now sitting here at home in front of the cameras, it's gone a little bit differently. But what does this mean for the upcoming decisions? And what can we, what is at stake? What can we do to spur action? So we have about 30 minutes to talk to these issues, and I'm really pleased to introduce this great lineup of speakers on the stage. Firstly, welcome to Minna Epps, who's the Director of the Global Marine and Polar Programme from IUCN. We have Alison Clausen, who is part of the UN Decade of Ocean Science with UNESCO. Lodewijk Upspoel, he's at the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. Reese Pacheco, sorry Reese, from World Surf League. Pacheco, sorry. We have Tara O'Neill, who's a futurist and strategist. Short as well, I see, and Marcia, who are representing from the youth groups as well. So thanks very much for joining this session. So we'll start. We've heard from earlier discussions, if you've been listening to the summit, that where we are in terms of reaching the 2020 sustainable goals on the ocean, number 14. So we've basically still not ended overfishing. We haven't tackled yet the issue of ending harmful fisheries subsidies. And while we may just about reach the 10% target, we're still a long way off for ensuring that it's actually strong protection. So Lodewijk, I'm going to call on you from a government perspective. What do you think have been the main roadblocks for achieving these targets?
Well, roadblocks, it's a difficult system working together globally from different legal approaches, different perhaps understanding of what we are trying to achieve. But let me take you back a little bit, because the 10% target for protecting ocean space and coastal areas stems from the Aichi agreements. So this is an ambition formulated with a bit of a realistic background. And this is the minimum we need to do. And can we do it? Out of such an ambition or strategy comes the part that you have to get your legislation in place. In terms of the Netherlands, we're part of the EU. So what you've seen throughout the years is building a coherent system of legislation which all works together. For us, the Common Fisheries Policy, the Marine Strategy from 2008, Natura 2000 networks, it's all been on the table, but then you have to start implementing it. So you have to find the space at sea or in the coastal areas where you do need this protection. You need to gather data. You need to see who is actually doing something in that area. What are the unique features and how can you protect them? And then building up that understanding, then of course you get into a certain type of negotiation. Should we allow certain activities to happen at certain times or not at all? What is actually the baseline we are looking for restoration or protection? What is the ambition? And then you have to put that down in management plans, which have to be implemented. And in part of the negotiation, you see who can implement those measures. Is it us nationally, or do we need, for instance, the European Commission in terms of our fisheries policy? So that takes a bit of time before you be able to effectively implement the measures you've chosen. For the moment, we are, for instance, waiting for a message from the European Commission that they agree on fisheries measures in the Dogger Bank, being a bit more complicated now that the UK is leaving the EU. So this is an entire system which need to be put in place. The good thing is that most of us around the world have experience right now, and we have some big players who can do a lot and either are moving or not. So that's a bit of, I think, the main problem why we're not at those targets yet. And indeed, there's political will, you need political will, but we also turn to politics for the money.
Yeah.
And then there's a balance between what is the national priority, is this the ocean or is this something else?
Thanks. So you say, I mean, so it does take time, obviously, to put in place all the measures and rules. But as we're hearing from there, you know, there is not much time we have left to save the ocean. So how can we actually ensure that political will increases and action speeds up, do you think? Will it be any different this next 10 years? Do you see a cause for hope?
Absolutely, and those of you who are willing to read a bit will be able to read a lot. So we had not only the Ocean Conference with its background note where a lot of things are explained, we also have the zero draft of the Biodiversity Convention, and in which you find back where we want to move with these targets, and also the 2030 target. So there's a whole set in motion already to get to the next step, and 3030 or 2030 is not actually where we want to end up. The vision globally is to be in sync with nature by 2050. Personally, I hope we could do it earlier, and I hope that the decade of restoration will help with that. But if you want to change objectives and targets for marine protection, you have to look at the baseline. We have this oyster reef project, which we couldn't restore oyster reefs. But what is the baseline we take? Is this from 1800 or is this from 1900 when the beds were half destroyed? So set that ambition and be realistic about it. But yes, you're right, the work needs to start today. And I think the movement and the political will around the globe is there. The practical problem, how do you implement it? How do you make sure that, for instance, fishermen, they have also a future instead of just buying them out, because we need also the food from the sea. So this is where the problems start occurring.
Thank you. So Mina, I'm going to turn to you. So we're talking, so we keep missing the targets. I mean, from your opinion, does it make sense? Ambitious and realistic, can that be the same thing? And you know, what really, you know, is it worth setting these targets in your opinion?
So basically, if it's worth continue setting ambitious targets if we are not reaching them, I would say absolutely yes. I think we need to continue to set ambitious targets, not just to set the target, but actually pursue them and implement them. And I think that, you know, we must do this to kind of adequately address biodiversity loss. But I think what's also essential to any target that you set, you have to look at, you know, what is your desirable outcome? And as Ludwig actually designed, yes, is it to halt biodiversity loss? We're seeing now a global, you know, crisis with the pandemic. Some communities around adjacent MPAs are protected if they have problems. I mean, food security, etc. I think, I mean, in terms of setting the targets, even while the 10% target actually was very ambitious politically to reach, right? So, but it goes back to what I was mentioning previously in terms of whether it's a scientific, you know, political strategy or scientific one. I think it comes down to that it's not just a percentage targets, it also present where you do it and what kind of protection. So once you designated an area, how do you assure that it is highly protected? And then, you have to look at types of habitats. And I think for some countries or nations, it's more or less easy to achieve these objectives. But what we're seeing is a little bit of, when you set targets, it's great because, you have a rush to kind of go towards, and there's more and more areas being designated. But how do you really ensure that they're effectively managed, governed, and equitably used and shared? And some people can say, oh, well, wait, let's first get to 10 and, then, or we get to 30 by designation, then we can worry about, the rest. But I think it's very clear to have a good vision. And if we go back to the ACHI targets, I think one thing they did there is they separated land from sea. So sea had one, land had one target, sea had a different target. What is the vision that we want to go now? Well, let's try to see if we can keep it together. And going back to, looking at the common denominator. So Ludovic mentioned the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is now coming out with a new set of targets to kind of replace that. You're then thinking, yes, so what should they look like? And some of the conservation community might have even more ambitious, saying, no, nature needs half, or you might need to have 20% of seascapes, which is a climate change management refuge, right? And then you have the state members. So of course, ultimately, any kind of convention which is kind of negotiated between states and seeking a convention might have a slightly lower ambition, but I think we still need to press for these very ambitious targets. And then, we can move to the next phases. And then another area that's also looking at is the other types of convention also dealing with biodiversity. There's the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. Now, we need that to come in place and have that framework in order to enable us to get to that target, right? The 30 by 30. So
that's the UN treaty, the treaty that's under negotiation for protection of the high seas.
Yes,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was supposed to be, obviously, it's supposed to be the final one this year. Now that has been postponed, and that's happening with other types of negotiation. Governing, the deep sea, the seabed. And that is also something that's been postponed. Harmful subsidy, we need to end overfishing in IUU. The WTO ministerial has also been postponed. But I think the ambition is there, certainly for the conservation community. It's just that, we still have to broaden the ambition and the planning and designing, and so that we can move to implementation. In the interest of time, I can stop there and can go back to.
Yeah, so definitely the key message, it's important to have international targets. It raises the ambition, it keeps us focused as well. A question that's come in, and I think that's for Lodewijk, is that you talk about national priorities, obviously, as an issue. Is this not the biggest hurdle, given that each nation has such different priorities and levels of governance?
Correct. Correct.
Sorry.
Yeah. And then Minna, you can come in after Lodewijk, please. Thanks. Yeah.
That's correct. But here we turn to also what Peter Thompson has explained on the SDGs. And there are more than one SDG. They're all linked through water. There is a strong link for migratory species also, which is dam removal. So you need sea to source, source to sea. You need to think poverty, equality, gender. You need to think about the whole system, including building materials and whatever, action on climate change. What's happening right now with the implementation of the new set of goals is that countries are making voluntary national reviews. So they go through the books entirely with society, and you can find them on the website of the UN. And this is brilliant stuff, because this gives an opportunity to set the priorities and put them in sync, so that you understand that if you do something for SDG, and so you try to have your food security, that you understand where is this food coming from, how do we deal about it, what is fair, what is achievable, what's not, and so it might take a bit of time, but to reinforce that type of process of integrated thinking, planning, and being ahead of the game before biodiversity collapse, this is what is becoming much more known and part of our systems. So that's hopeful.
Yeah, thank you. Integrated management, very important. Minna, do you want to follow up on that? on anything on the question about national priorities and how that balances with international action?
Yeah, no, I think it's important that I think I have to be careful what I say, but of course we know that, you know, certain countries are more pro, and if even, I mean, the 30 by 30 is a good example because you have certain countries that have signed up or others haven't, as it usually happens in these negotiations. And even you mentioned also the common fisheries policies and the quotas, is that there are several landlocked countries that might have a stake directly, but, you know, they will also kind of use that to kind of form the allies. So I think that's really important.
Great, thank you. Alison, if we're going to move over to you. So how do we make sure that we don't miss these targets again? You're involved in the UN Ocean Decade of Science. What role can this play in terms of encouraging greater ambition and action?
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. And it's, you know, it's a great question. And I think it's one that's preoccupying all of us at the moment, particularly this year as many of these agendas are coming to an end and we are actively setting new targets. It's complex. There are a huge number of facets, but I'd like to focus on 3 areas where I think that are really important and where ocean science and ocean knowledge really play an important role. The first of those is making sure we optimize the use of science in setting targets. Now, obviously, targets are a negotiation. We've heard from Mina and Ludovic about how important that negotiation process can be, but we have an obligation to make sure that there is as much science taken into account as possible in the setting of those targets. We also need to make sure that in that process, we're understanding what the ramifications of those targets are on social systems, on economic systems, and on cultural systems. I think that's really important that we're looking at their targets in the context that they exist and they're going to be implemented in. We need, secondly, to make sure all stakeholders understand the targets and understand what's going to happen if we fail to meet them. We need to get targets out of UN meeting rooms and into people's lives to make them relevant, and that's something across the board. And I think ocean literacy, education, communication are really important tools there. And then thirdly, targets are only worthwhile if they're used. I mean, it's fine setting them, but if you're not monitoring them, tracking them, and adapting and changing, then they have very limited value. So we need science and knowledge to develop methodologies, to be able to generate the data, to be able to really understand progress towards those targets, and then change course if they're not working. Now, the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development is going to start in January 2021. It's a UN-wide initiative. The Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission that I work for is coordinating the preparation phase, but we're working with a huge number of stakeholders within and outside the UN system. The vision of that decade is really the science we need for the ocean we want. And it's a framework that aims to bring together stakeholders across all groups, so across governments, across NGOs, communities, Indigenous and local knowledge holders, private sector and industry, to really unite around common priorities for the ocean and develop together with knowledge generators and knowledge users, develop actions that can contribute to some of the global priorities facing the ocean. There's a lot to say about the decade. I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but I think there are some clear ways in which the decade can contribute to this question of targets, and that can be things like identifying thresholds or tipping points, or interdisciplinary research actions that look at the social or political consequences of implementing different types of targets. The decade can also contribute to the development of better methodologies to monitor progress against targets. So there is some work already underway looking at nutrient loading and different indices for coastal eutrophication. And the decade can really give a push to the importance of developing those sorts of methodologies. And then finally, the decade is going to have a big focus on communication, education, capacity development, and ocean literacy. And this comes back to that idea of making sure that when we're talking about targets, people have to relate to them and understand them and appreciate why they're important. And having, you know, the full generation from youth to working professionals to older generations understanding and being ocean literate is really essential, and the decade will have a big emphasis on that aspect of communication and awareness raising. So perhaps I'll leave it there in the interest of time, but happy to answer any questions that come up about the decade, of course.
Sure. Thank you, Alison. Actually, I have a question. So science is essential. I mean, it should underpin all our decisions and stuff. But sometimes the lack of science can be used as an excuse for not making progress or taking action. How do you respond to those arguments? Where, for example, countries saying we can't protect this area because we still don't have enough science, even though the little that has been collected shows that it is an important area.
Yeah, it's a complex question, because we know people do use that as an excuse to not take action, and that's really one of the roles of organisations like IOCs to work with our member states, and to work through national committees and so on, to make sure again that understanding and awareness is there, that we have to adopt the precautionary approach, that we have to take whatever little science exists and sometimes draw conclusions to be able to take action. And importantly, we have to support governments or other stakeholders identify where those critical gaps are and help mobilize resources to be able to fill them as quickly as possible. But I think, you know, the broader the awareness of the importance of the ocean is globally, then there's less room there's less wiggle room. There are fewer loopholes that people can use and use those sorts of arguments. So again, it comes back to understanding and valuing the ocean by a broad sector of society.
Thank you. And just to remind our listeners, please do send in your questions if you have any, because we'd love to answer it. We've got these experts here ready to answer all your questions. We will go next on to Reese from the World Surf League. So you've launched a great campaign on 30 by 30. We've heard it a number of times during the summit as well. What do you think our role should be as ocean advocates? And I would love to hear more about your initiative.
Thanks, and thanks for having me. I think Alison just segued perfectly into this, speaking about the broader awareness needed. You know, we know the science, the policy is being worked out, but having that public support is really important, because it empowers and enables those delegates to go to the negotiations and say, this is important, we have the backing of our constituents. So that's really where we feel we can help in this you know, essentially initiative. The World Surf League, as a professional body for sports and the global home for surfing, we have events all over the globe, truly everywhere, hundreds of surfing events and competitions with fans globally. And there's an incredible overlap of countries with large EEZs and great waves, and where our fans are. And so how can we leverage that passion for surfing, this place that we love to go to as both a place where we work as surfers, a place that provides us food, solace, everything. It's our home, it's our playground, it's our, place of worship, for so many of us. So how do we leverage that feeling and encourage our fans around the world, and all ocean recreators, not just surfers, but sailors, etc., to give them a voice and align that. So we created this campaign. It's to petition for 30 by 30 at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. It lives at weareoneocean.org. I'll actually share in the website real quickly here if people want to take a look, and drop the link in the chat for anyone. But we're really excited about this. What we're doing here with this campaign is enabling individuals, organizations to sign on and say that they support fully and highly protecting 30 by 30. That language being really critical, and we worked on that with the NRDC to make sure that we were using the right verbiage to speak the language of all of the policy experts here. So it's step one is signing the petition as an individual. That's super important, and we want to take that petition to the government officials and say, look, this is the ocean community saying that we fully support you going on this journey to protect the ocean. Step two, and a really important step in this process, is to also send a note to your delegate. So if you are, whatever country you're in, we've identified the environmental delegate for your region, and we want you to send them an email. And that's really easy to do with the petition. That enables you to voice your personal preference and your personal story as to why it's important. And we think that's going to help create dialogue and empower them as they go through, as they not just go to the Convention on Biological Diversity, as they go to the World Conservation Congress and a number of other meetings leading up to that moment. We want to make sure this is in the back of their minds the entire time and really pressing. And then step 3, of course, is to share this out to your wider fans and friends and everyone in the world and get everybody on board. I kind of skipped a step. If you're in the U.S., we actually are encouraging you to contact your state governor. We think that's the most effective way to encourage participation in the United States. And we have a number of incredible partners who have signed on, from the Ocean Race to World Sailing, Surfrider Foundation in the U.S. I think Surfrider Europe is also on board. I saw a question in the chat, so we're happy to have you guys. I mean, there are incredible groups that have already gotten on board, and we want all the different ocean conservation orgs to be able to use this campaign to promote the message to their fans, their followers, whoever they want to share it with around the world. We're trying to make this a kind of single backbone on which we all build to get this message across. And so it's the best way that we thought we in the surfing world could help the overall initiative and campaign.
Great. It sounds great, Reese. Thanks. And so the overall objective is to get the 30 by 30 target adopted next year at the CBD, and then obviously for action by governments. Yeah. Yeah,
correct. We see this. I've worked really closely with Lisa Spear at NRDC, who heads up their International Oceans Program, looking at the High Seas Treaty, et cetera. And she used the term, it's helping pave the way, right? Like by getting this in line at that high level, that paves the way for all the conservation orgs, the states, the countries, the regional governments, and local stakeholders to then go and do their work, right? So setting those strong targets, that's the way I see it, is how can we pave the way for this work to get done at the local level? We're not telling anyone how to do it or what to do it. We're trying to say, how do we get agreement on what those targets are so that it can then be implemented at the local level in the right way that is done equitably for all.
Great. Yeah. So the key things: sign the petition, get in touch with your local representative, and share the word as well with all your friends and family. Any other tips for us if we're not like cool surfers or anything that can get out there? Anything for us ordinary people that we can also do to make more noise, or recommendations?
I'm not a cool surfer. I'll just firstly, I know you weren't saying me, but I just want to make sure. No, I think, listen, my friend Melody at Bye Bye Plastic Bags said it once to me. She was like, never underestimate your ability to influence the 1 meter around you. And so I think, in this day and age where we have all these social media influencers and, friends who have thousands of followers and friends who have none, whatever, you can influence the few people around you. And that's really, really powerful. Don't underestimate that. Don't ever underestimate your voice, specifically when we're, collectively putting it together. Every single voice is going to count. And so in a time where we don't have the ability to go out and rally in the streets or have major sort of, the climate strikes, et cetera, we can't do that. We've got to activate and organize online. And so we saw this as a really important time to leverage, this sort of this desire we all have to do more and to protect our planet, while we're doing it from the safety of our, home offices or whatever. So yeah, please, everyone, go sign and share it, and send any feedback our way.
So Marcia has asked a question in relation, in particular, to the youth. What special role can they play in ensuring action? What can they do as well to really help?
The youth are so important. Are you asking me or asking?
Yeah.
Mark?
Well, to you, but obviously to the wider panel as well, if you want to talk to it. Yeah. The
youth are so important, and that's one area that we thought where we could help is because our audience within the World Surf League is fairly young. Surfing is a fairly young sport. Our surfers as athletes are pretty young. And so we thought it was a good way for us to help try to engage and bring some of that young surfing audience to the table who don't maybe know about, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, or at least, I don't know, the youth these days are so much better than I was. As a kid, I don't know what I was doing. I was worried about school and sports and girls or something like that. So the youth these days are way more on it. They're on top of it. They're like politically minded. But my point is we thought we could help bring it to our audience. And so however the various groups that get on board want to take the campaign to their youth audience, I really encourage that. And I think the better we can get people engaged earlier in creating that civic engagement, the better.
Yeah, great. And we have another question here. It's directed to Reese, but I think our other panelists could also answer it. It says on the website, your website, there aren't any links to the 30% number about where it comes from. But there are a number of good studies that support this as a minimum area to protect, and it's a good number to aim for. It would be good to point to these studies as well as some popular science articles. Otherwise, it looks like it's a random number, which we all know it's not. But that's a recommendation to you, Reese, maybe for the website. I don't know.
We do actually link to some sources at the bottom of the full petition. So Luca, if you go to on the site, if you go to weareoneocean.org/petition, it has the full petition, and there's some sources listed at the bottom. But it's a great note. If we feel that we need to add more, then we'll take a look at that, and hopefully some of the science minds and policy minds here in the panel can help provide some more talking points for us.
Definitely, thank you. So we still have a few more minutes if there are any further questions. Mina, do you want to? Yes, please.
Oh, there's more questions coming. I was just going to say to that point, we'll be very happy to, IUCN has a whole commission, the World Commission on Protected Areas. They have a lot of kind of published studies as well to kind of demonstrate how it's actually vested in science. So we're happy to, share some of that with you. I still want to go back to, again, saying this is great, we have this target, and how can we, public pressure, getting it out there, I think that's great. I heard in the beginning of the conversation, they were saying that the conservationists, they don't know how to make it exciting. So I think we all have a role to play, from movie stars to, sports athletes, because look at what we have in common, which is really, the love for our ocean and to make it better. So we all do our part but when it comes to this 30 by 30, I think it's great. But we also have to acknowledge that when a country designates a certain area, not all countries have the same resources to manage it and effectively implement it. And I think, there's also a way of looking at how can you actually get to that level that everybody can assure the same protection. And in addition to that, IUCN has actually developed a green list, which is a kind of an international standard or certification for marine protected areas. Sorry, it's for protected areas. It's a Freudian slip, which also applies to marine protected areas. And then we can see, but it's a very evolving community. So it's a dynamic ocean, and we need to have dynamic management model, and we need to make sure that we all have the resources to effectively manage it and govern it.
Definitely. Resourcing is a huge issue in terms of ensuring effective management. Maybe Mina, you can put in the app later the link to the green areas. So we're almost ready, but we've got 1 or 2 minutes, and I'm going to pick on you, Tara, as you've been sat there so patiently listening, whether you want to give some few thoughts as well to this topic.
I'm a little bit of a fish out of water, quite honestly, in this particular case, because I work in the innovation space. But one of the things that's really important about the future is the fact that none of us are very good at imagining it. And in that space, consider COVID. Was anybody prepared for that? And so one of the things that this kind of conference focuses on are the issues that we can see right in front of us. But when you look out 20 or 30 years, what other impacts are we not looking for on the fringes that we need to be prepared for? So how is artificial intelligence going to affect ocean health in the future? How is 3D printing as maybe an opportunity rather than a threat? Something that we can start to gather plastics and we can start to make fantastic things. What are these opportunities? How is the mental health of our society changing how we feel about things? What is going to happen with unemployment after COVID-19? And all of these things will have impacts on our ocean health. And we have to look forward and consider the ridiculous, which is very difficult for people to do, to consider what might happen in the future. So using futures thinking when you're starting to consider some of these policies and some of these things, some of these action plans, I think can help people broaden their perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very, very important. And talking about the future, and I'm looking at our youth representatives here. I know we're coming almost to the end. It would be lovely to hear from Marcia if you have some any thoughts that you'd also like to share, some kind of inspirational words to make sure that we all leave this conference feeling energized and ready to save the ocean.
Oh yeah, it's really interesting to hear everyone. So yeah, thank you for joining. And I think it's already really nice that the youth is also involved and that there are not only you old, smart and wise people. So I think that's already really nice. And yeah, what I want to say, I really like the world, and I hope yeah, that we can fix everything and we can have a long and happy life. But yeah, I think yeah, it's also really important to have the political will that the people were also talking about, and the collaboration. And yeah, at the end, I also found it really interesting that it's also right that the monitoring and tracking of the targets, that's also really important. So yeah, for me, this was really interesting, and I can take this with me and I can inspire my friends and
Great.
my other people. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. And I'm very honored that you chose our more policy focused session to join as well. That gives hope for the future as well, and future decision makings. We still have a bit of time, just a little couple of minutes. We're still here. And Mina, there's a question that's come in for you from Luca. He said, there are concerted efforts now to build a digital twin of the North Sea, largely based on artificial intelligence. So it is not a far-fetched question at all. Oh, and Lodewijk's put his hand up, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, actually, have a look at the mspchallenge.info website. This is a serious game I started to develop back in 2011 because I wanted to have a look into the sea, what's happening there, who's eating what do I find there? Because I couldn't get enthusiastic by all this paper with these letters I got when I started the job on the ocean. And this is a tremendous effort that we can use the power of technology to bring the ocean to the people, to make it become something which is intrinsically theirs, that they understand that also a lot of rain and oxygen comes from the ocean. The ocean are our lungs, and yeah, a digital twin helps some bureaucrats make better decisions.
Well, I'm all for any tools that help bureaucrats make better decisions. So we are now, yeah, we've come to the end of the session. I'd like to thank our panelists very much for your words of wisdom and insights. Also thanks to all of you that joined.
Before you wrap up, Natalie, can we thank you? You did a great job.
Oh.
You being thrust into moderator position. You know, we're all being like forced to do these things that we're not used to doing. You did a great job. These things aren't easy, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. I
really appreciate that, and my new life skills I'm learning as well. Thanks very much, and yeah, keep track of the website as well. And I think this session will be made available if you want to look back on things. And yeah, once again, thanks very much for your time, and I will hand it over to my able room managers to do whatever they do. Thanks very much.
Great job, Natalie.
Thank you. Bye bye.
And thanks everyone for sharing. Bye-bye. That was great.